welcome to the Weekly Artifact. I'm Justin, and this is my co-host.
I'm Alex.
We're two former creative writing majors searching for meaning in a sea of content. Every other week, we'll select one piece of content each, an article, a video, another podcast that we found particularly interesting and discuss it. As always, our comments are our own and are not associated with any institution.
The show may contain explicit language or theme. See the show notes for specific content warnings. Justin, what do you got for us this week?
My article this week is from the Smithsonian, and it is called "In 1870, Henrietta Wood Sued for Reparations and Won." It's from SmithsonianMag.com, to be specific. So the article talks about a former slave named Henrietta Wood, and it talks about how 25 years after she had been enslaved, she won a settlement in reparations. And the article goes through how that happened. So she was born a slave in Kentucky and granted freedom in 1848, but then 5 years later was kidnapped by slave catchers and re-enslaved. So that was basically the basis for the lawsuit. And basically they tried to delay the lawsuit in many different ways, and ultimately she only got a small percentage of what she wanted, but today that would be nearly $65,000 in what she ultimately won. And it remains the largest sum ever granted by a U.S. court in restitution for slavery, according to the article. The man's name who they sent to recapture was Zebulon Ward, and so basically the article says, Ward planned to make Wood the latest victim of this trade, but she resolved to fight. Wood secretly told her story to a sympathetic innkeeper who followed her to Lexington, where a lawsuit was filed on her behalf asserting she was free. That's sort of like the beginning of the lawsuit. And then after the Civil War started and the slaves were... Well, after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, basically Wood's enslaver moved his 300 slaves on a 400-mile march to Texas so that the federal soldiers of the Civil War would not be able to affect them there. And he also promised to pay his slaves $10 a month, but that never occurred. So that's sort of all like the background for the lawsuit, but how basically how they attempted to delay the suit was, according to the article, Ward's lawyer stalled, claiming that her failed antebellum suit for freedom proved his innocence. They also said that Ward's alleged crimes had occurred too far in the past, a recurring argument against reparations, which I'll come back to that quote in a little bit. The article goes on to say that Wood versus Ward, which is the name of the case, did not set a sweeping legal precedent. And they have a quote from one of the judges in the article. It said, "Fortunately for this country, the institution of slavery has passed away." He had instructed the jurors, "and we should not bring our particular ideas of the legality or morality of an institution of that character into court or the jury box." He had cautioned jurors against an excessive award, claiming falsely that many former slaveholders already regretted slavery. Again, this is in 1878 when the case is ultimately settled.
It's been 8 years, we get it. We did it for 200 years, but it's been 8 years and it's bad now. Christ, I feel bad, all right? Damn it. I built my entire fortune off the back of it, but it's annoying now that I have to pay for it some more. Fuck, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, all right?
Yeah, so we'll get into that. But yeah, so basically, Wood's lawyers were trying to basically make it clear that this case was about, as the article says, the evils of slavery rather than sort of this narrow decision that the judge ultimately decided that it would be. But according to the article, quote, "few Americans wish to dwell on those evils," unquote. And many newspapers described Wood's suit as an old case or a relic of slavery times, consigning stories like hers to a fading past. What she ultimately received was $2,500, which that was the small percentage of the $20,000 that she originally asked for. Her former enslaver Ward left an estate worth at least $600,000 when he died. In 1894. So Wood only received $2,500, but Ward was still able to be behind, this $600,000 state, which would be multi-millionaire terms of today. So the article just sort of pointing out that this wealth gap was still sort of embedded into the case if you look at sort of what money each was able to sort of like retain after this. But at the same time, the case wasn't insignificant because with help from with the money that she received from this case, Wood was able to move with her son Arthur to Chicago. Arthur buys a house, starts a family, able to pay for his own schooling, and becomes one of the first Black graduates of Northwestern, or what will eventually become Northwestern University's law school. And then Arthur himself had children who were able to start professional careers. And so that's sort of the long-lasting impact of the case, even though she was only able to get a small percentage of what she wanted. So that's the article. So I guess we can get into sort of our thoughts on it. Yeah, you already touched it. I mean, I feel like the biggest takeaway for me is just how, we're in 1878. It's been, the Civil War ends in 1865. And well, even less than 13 years, like while the case was going on, which had been 8 years of litigation. So within like 5 years, they're already starting to make these arguments that slavery is too far in the past to do any reparations for, do any sort of restitution for, to a person who was actually enslaved. Like it's not even like this was a person who was suing for someone else who was enslaved. Like she herself was a slave, and they were saying because it was 5 years ago that she was a slave, it was too late for her to be compensated for it, which I just think is really recasts some of the current, or I'll just say, like it seems like the current argument against reparations is the same as it was then, which is just that it was too long ago. But it just shows that it's always been too long ago, according to the people who don't want to do reparations anyway. So that was my sort of biggest takeaway, but I don't know if you had other thoughts on it.
I guess my biggest takeaway is the same as years, but just like thinking about as somebody that's like read a lot of cases for school and like are familiar with like judges' instructions to juries, how just like I don't know, bad faith of an instruction that was, like how just like, well, even damaging, like as far as like what they awarded, because the jury doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. Like famously, like people like don't know like how laws work or how like punishments should be handed out until the judge tells them what to do. And so to say like, listen, most people are sad about it now, like A, is as far as I'm concerned irrelevant, but B, like also just untrue. Even if that was the case, even if everybody did like, which would be literally impossible because they were doing it, but like to say that they were sorry about it like doesn't change what is owed. And like you said, like not only had it barely happened, but also like famously things like Juneteenth and shit, like people weren't doing like getting rid of their slaves until they were like forced to, like even past like the Emancipation Proclamation. Like they're like like there's no reason to believe what the judge said, but I mean you kind of have to when you're doing as like just a jury person, like you probably just take their word at face value, but also like that's what you're supposed to do. And so like, is it worth getting a retrial in the like case that's given the most reparations? No, it's probably not going to work out for her if she like asked for more money, even though she deserves it. But like it's just seeing like how along every step of the way basically they're just trying to like shut the shit down, and against all of it she still ended up with the money.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's, if there's any silver lining to the story, it is just that she at least got something from this. But yeah, it's just incredible how much she had to go through to even get just like a little piece of what she was owed. And also that, it had to be because of, her being freed previously and then sort of like illegally recaptured, rather than sort of just like a general acknowledgement of slavery being wrong.
Right. Yeah, like slavery is fine if you do it the first time, but you stepped over the line. That slavery wasn't. But
yeah, but I guess the other than useful thing about the article is just thinking about sort of I feel like probably the second biggest argument against reparations is just that if you sort of award this money, it will just get wasted immediately and not have any sort of long-term impact. But this article sort of demonstrates that no, it could actually be used housing that can then allow you to go to a certain school, which can allow you to get an education, that can open the doors for generations potentially.
And even if you give them the money and then they just spend it on whatever, you use them as chattel. That's not your call anymore. Like, what are you talking about? You lost the sort of right to judge how people use their money when you used it to buy people.
Mm-hmm.
But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, and I feel like if they actually believed that argument, then, the people who are against reparations, I feel like if they actually believed that the money would just be wasted, then they wouldn't really have such a problem with giving it away.
That's also true.
Because if it's just going to go back to some corporation or whatever, then it shouldn't be an issue for them. But yeah, so I guess I do think to sort of go beyond the article a little bit. I do think reparations is a potentially tricky issue in terms of its implementation. But I think in principle, like, it definitely makes sense to be for it. You can say what your thoughts on that are, but I just think that I do think there could potentially be some question over like who exactly qualifies. For me, I think the easiest way around that. Okay, I'll save that first. I guess what are your thoughts on reparation generally before I get into the implementation?
Just as a general idea, like, I'm just sort of like, yeah, that sounds like it's a thing that should happen. I've never like sort of looked into like the math or like theorized or like presented like best practices how to do it, but just generally like pro, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's as much as I can sort of comfortably say about it. And I guess I can only really come from like a moral standpoint, because again, I haven't like read that much about it, but just I'll check me off for yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you go back to it though.
Yeah, because I think where it gets tricky a little bit is just that you have newer Black immigrants who were not necessarily implicated in the slave trade, and you also have people who can trace ancestors to the slave trade, but maybe only a few ancestors. Like, they might not even. There's people who can definitely are either just sort of seen as white or can pass for white, but who can trace their ancestry to at least having like a few people who are enslaved. And if there's African Americans who already have lots of money, like Robert Smith or Oprah Winfrey, who are billionaires, like, do they get reparations? Is it the same amount? How does that work? Or even just like Barack Obama and his kids, like, and you could come down either way on that. Like, you could say like, yeah, why not? But I could also see a legitimate argument to say like it either doesn't matter, or like, we can, if we only get a certain amount of money, we should better allocate it rather than give it to people who already have money or whatever. So I feel like the only way sort of around this might just be to give everyone some money. I think it's a little bit like that's why I sort of think that just a more socialist approach of wealth redistribution is probably the closest that we can actually get to reparations. I think it's a little bit too tricky to try and break it down along either some sort of racial categorization or some sort of like lineage tracing. So I think just redistribution of wealth is probably the closest we're gonna be able to get to it.
Does Candace Owens get any money, Justin?
We'll take her money to redistribute.
I support that indefinitely. I mean, yeah, it's the problem that they made themselves. But like, I mean, the longer the wait, the harder it is to sort of get everybody, I guess is how I want to say it. But like, like, you had everybody, you had it before. Like, Could have started handing out 40 acres and a mule, famously, but here we are.
Yeah, that's what I like about this article too. Is just not only does it sort of expose the lie of it's been too long, but it also shows the reason why it's been too long is because these issues came up and you didn't deal with them back then. So it's not like all of a sudden, hundreds of years later, people were like, "Oh, what about reparations?" It's no, literally, within a couple years. Pretty much immediately, people were saying, we need reparations, and you guys came up with excuses for why not to do it. So you can't then turn around and say it's been too long. It's no, you made it be too long.
Mm-hmm.
So even though at the same time it hasn't actually been too long, we could still do something, even if it looks different now than it might back then. We can still definitely do something. So,
all right, Justin, hear me out though. Instead of any sort of full reparations or redistribution of wealth or toppling the powers that be, revolution, what if we just open one community center in the Bronx?
I'll have to save that for the movie episode, maybe. All right, Alex, that's all I got for my artifact. What's your artifact this week?
So my artifact is now officially the longest artifact, bitch. It is a 50-minute podcast recording, even though the original episode is no longer available on the Apple Podcast app, probably because of logging issues, but it is available on YouTube.
I listened to it. I listened to it on the Podcast Addict app.
Well, it's on the Podcast Addict app for anybody interested in
that. And I listened to it at 1.5 speed, so it was only 34 minutes.
Justin, that's not fine. You know what? You have been a thorn in my side since the second I met you. Always tearing me down. You brought me on here just to humiliate me on a public platform. Anyway, so this is an episode of Stuff You Should Know called How Satanism Works, which is based on an article that the host will reference throughout. But it's just sort of a broad overview of both sort of the history and creation of Satan as a fixture in Christian history and mythology, as well as the formation of the manifestations of Satanism and public interpretations of devil worship, and where the church and the Church of Satan and the Temple of Satan as it is founded today. The first thing off the bat that they mentioned that is sort of the biggest sort of misunderstanding now is that Satanism and specifically the Church of Satan is not devil worshippers. They're decidedly an atheistic, I guess, ideology founding organization, sort of based on the idea though that they would take Satanism both as sort of Satan as an anti-establishment figure throughout his creation, to also being a very anti-Christian stance. So they just take the main negative being in the religion sort of as their sticking point. And in the beginning of the podcast, they talk about how we got to sort of the Satan we know it as, and how certain different names like Baal and Beelzebub were co-opted by Christian authors and Jewish authors, crafting their religious narrative as a way to as a co-opting and bastardization of the other religion's gods, to sort of say that we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. So there's always since the beginning, it's been good versus evil for the Christian mythology, which was sort of adapted from the Judaistic tradition of God being sort of all-encompassing good and bad. But now that since the dualism started, there was God and there was Satan. And then throughout history, people have been accused of devil worship, sort of even just extreme or wrong, I guess, interpretation of Christians as far as the mainstream Roman Catholic or other Protestant sort of traditions were concerned, would be were accused of devil worship just for the sake of, doing Christianity wrong, even if they were more zealous than the original Christians. And then, we get sort of another uptick with the, things like the Salem witch trials and the sort of mass incarceration and slaughter of, people, mostly, especially the Salem witch trials, women, accused of witchcraft and devil worship and sort of this occult status, which I don't think we've ever sort of really shaken as a society, as sort of what that means, even though there aren't anybody that is a devil worshiper or would attribute any sort of powers to the devil or Satan is decidedly not a member of the Church of Satan, because again, the Church of Satan is a decidedly atheistic and, uses the metaphor of Satan, not the sort of believing that he is a magical, powerful being of evil. The modern Church of Satan, the original church, the Church of Satan as we know it now, founded by Anton LaVey in 1969, and the publishing of the Satanic Bible, which itself is sort of co-opted from previous secular humanist writings. There's like 9 satanic statements, 11 satanic rules of the earth, and the 9 satanic sins. But the Church of Satan, as is now, is sort of just a more or less a benign entity of just sort of like, low-key edgelord shit. But it used to sort of be a bigger movement of sort of, taking, a traditional Christian ideology to task. That sort of stalled, but from there the Satanic Temple came, which are the doing the Lord's work is how I'll describe them, of taking the separation of church and state to task. This is my favorite part, the reason I really want to talk about it, and why I will one day become a card-carrying member of the Satanic Temple once I have $200 burning a hole in my pocket, which they'll go from sort of town to town, state to state as needed, wherever public works like courts or town halls or schools that will have any sort of Christian practicing, where they'd have like a prayer in the beginning, or they'd have an after school program hosted by a Christian entity organization. The Satanic Temple will come there and say, well, listen, First Amendment, let's you can't give any preference to any religion, so we'll come in here with our pentagrams and our devil shit. They'll give their own benediction if they start prayers, and then people sort of realize, all right, well, then nobody gets to do it, and that's what I'll say is the good shit. But I'll sort of break off to Justin and ask you, sort of, before listening to this, sort of what you understood the Church of Satan to be, and where you are now. Any initial thoughts about the podcast, the Church of Satan, this, that, the other thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I really spent any time thinking about the Church of Satan. Although I think, in hindsight, I guess I was sort of familiar with them, only in that I knew about the part where they would basically test the limits of freedom of religion, or I guess not necessarily even test the limits, but just kind of point out the hypocrisy of people who claim to believe in freedom of religion, which I always appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, I mean, I guess I didn't really know exactly what it was, and in some ways I'm still not 100% sure what it looks like to be like a member, like in everyday practice, but...
Look no further, baby. Look no further.
But, yeah, I didn't really have any sort of notion going into it, and coming out of it, I guess it seems like they do some good stuff, but it also seems... It's kind of like supposed to be like edgy in this kind of performative way, and that you're either going to like it for that or you're not going to like it for that, but that's kind of like the point. That's supposed to be provocative in some way to sort of like accomplish their larger goals, which are kind of more just like trying to get more secularization. Yeah, I don't know. Like they're fine. I don't plan on ever becoming a member, but they seem to have their hearts in the right place. So
I guess if this isn't too personal a question of you, Justin, how religious of a household did you grow up in?
It wasn't super religious. We went to church for probably like most of my childhood, but we stopped when I was maybe 12, 13 years old. Not too long after I went through the whole, I don't even remember what it's called, like, but I did the whole like first communion thing. Not too long after that, actually, that I kind of we just stopped going. But it was never like super religious. we'd like pray before we ate sometimes, I guess. That was maybe as like religious as we got.
That, you know, that's not nothing, but like I was I mean, growing up with my fire and brimstone grandmother, who was also had a lot of other things going on that weren't good, because then I sort of, you know, she would use religion as an excuse for her terrible point of view on most things. I went to a religion private school, honestly, up through the end of undergrad and college, actually. And I mean, undergrad college was very mostly hands off. I mean, there were some required classes that were dumb, but it wasn't as sort of aggressive as the schooling I had before that. And so a lot of this has probably left a lot more sour of a taste in my mouth than yours. So this is, like you said, performatively edgy and not, they kind of, I mean, it's very much individualistic, so it can kind of be whatever the fuck you want it to be. They have their rules, but it's sort of, you know, you interpret it how you want to and do your own thing.
The rules like don't harm little children.
Yeah, one of the rules is just don't, you do not harm little children, which seems a lot to be sort of to clarify that no, they're not doing any sort of, you know, blood rituals with any children, and there's no confirmed cases of any sort of child harm or abuse through like attributed to devil worship or the Church of Satan.
It just seems strange. It's like it seems like it's like, okay, what happened that like you had to add that rule? But
I want to say that they did that off the top, not that it was a PR. I think it was a PR stunt that they were forced into, not something that they did themselves.
Okay.
But to be fair, and I don't need to read all the rules because it's the initial podcast and it's on the website very readily available. But do not give opinions or advice unless you're asked. So we fucked up. We've been fucking up since the first episode of the fucking podcast. Fortunately, don't tell your troubles to others unless you're sure they want to hear them. Fortunately, we do provide consent to saying what you want to talk about in the safe room. So I think we cleared the bar on that one.
Yeah, they're the original. Are you in the right headspace to hear some news that could potentially that you were
big on the emotional labor of a friendship. Top 2. Do not complain about anything to which you need not subject yourself. Always a good rule. And then when walking in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him. I mean, what more can you ask for?
Yeah. I wasn't sure about the destruction language there, but
I don't think they are either, but listen, man. You do what you gotta do. Oh, also, they're very much, I want to get the right language here. Do not make sexual advances unless you're giving the mating signal. Big fans of affirmative consent, but they also want you to just fuck anybody you want that also wants to fuck you, man. Just go to town. And, you know, that's just free love, baby.
Yeah, also not exactly sure what the mating signal is, but
I don't know, but I'm starting to really lean into late night radio DJ mode right now with that. So whatever you want it to be, man. Gotta roll through. Slick Al and J-Man coming at you. Spin that track, baby. Last thing I'll say is the 9 satanic sins, and one of them is lack of aesthetics, which is to say that they say an aesthetic is a personal thing reflective of your nature, but there are universally pleasing and harmonious configurations that should not be denied. And I like to think that that just means that I'm right for always wearing Hawaiian shirts, and you're wrong for always wearing those half shirt, half sweatshirt, long sleeve atrocities. With your half jeans, half khaki, half cargo short pants.
See, this is why I can't get behind the Church of Satan, because they don't understand haute couture. They don't understand fashion forward. They don't understand the future, you know.
The utilitarian aesthetic is valid, and I will not hear anything else.
Just because they don't want to be out here saying trends doesn't mean that I'm not going to be doing my thing.
Justin the Tastemaker. Look it up. Oh, my God. Oh, listen, Justin. That's the thing, but they just want, you know, no stupidity, no pretentiousness, no self-deceit, no herd conformity, do not have a lack of perspective, do not be forgetful of past orthodoxies, do not have counterproductive pride, and do not fall prey to solipsism. Solipsism is the viewer theory that the self is all that can be known to exist, and we know that there's more out there. for every danger in the world, you need not be afraid, because on the other side, there's a place of safety, a room you can call your own for whatever you need. You know what I mean, Justin? Picking up what I'm putting down, J-Dog, on this late night Slick Al, the weekly artifact.
Yeah, I think
DJ,
I got you, Al.
play us out.
All right, Alex, now that we're in the safe room, what do you have on your mind?
What I have on my mind is and this is especially true in sort of academic settings, and we've experienced some together, and I'm sure you've had some by yourself, and I've had some by myself since. But when students, but just sort of anybody, will ask a presenter or a teacher sort of for how to perfect a nuanced skill that you can really only figure out by doing and often failing. For example, the two that I have in mind are in a creative writing class that we took together. Somebody sort of was asking, like, well, what's the exact right amount of details to put in? Like, I have too much detail, too little detail. How do I like perfectly set a scene? And as try as the professor's might, there's not like a right answer. It's how you write and what you need to get out of the scene. And then the other one was somebody in a sexual harassment focused class was asking sort of, when do you know that you've crossed a line, or where exactly is the line of crossing for when it's become sexual harassment, which is to ask at that point in the class is sort of asinine, because because you just like haven't learned that like your relationships are different with different people. Like I can't sexually harass you the same way I would sexually harass like a random coworker of mine. Like there's there's a lot more leeway.
But no, yeah, I don't know. I've like dealt with students before though, and I feel like especially like in classes and stuff where they're like are just worried about the grade, like they have this weird tendency to they just basically want the professor to tell them like how do I get an A or whatever.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, like tell me exactly like how to write an introduction to this essay or whatever. It's like I can't tell, like I can give you like general tips, but like if you're following a template to write an intro, like you're probably not writing like the greatest intro anyway. Like so there's no point in asking about like how to like the exact formula for creating something or like understanding something that's like inherently not formulaic, but
Right.
they can like only think in terms of the grade. So
Well, that's and that's the reason I mostly complain about it in a classroom setting for me is that like you're just wasting everybody else's time. Like I don't like want to be here any longer, and like you ask these questions, just like dragging everything out. But also like there's like so few things, especially in life, but let alone like even in class, unless you're like literally like coding or like doing equations, like have like an objective like standard to hit. Like there's like you can't. I don't know. It's just like you said, like they just want to make sure that you're right, and like if you just tell them exactly what to do, then they can be like, well, this is what you said to do, and it's just it's just annoying, and it in some capacity doesn't reek of cowardice. Well, I was gonna say it, but that sounds too strong, but I famously come off too strong, so it reeks of cowardice. To say like, well, what does it become like too personal of a relationship? Listen, you got to get a couple HR complaints before you figure out the sweet spot. You know, I'm not speaking from experience, but
yeah,
you should have figured out how to talk to people in middle school when there was no consequences. Not fucking 20, not when you're 30.
Yeah, but they really do love that line of, well, this is how you said to do it. That
Oh my god, yeah,
I've
I
had
can
that
only
happen
imagine.
before, which then just like makes it even harder when you're in that instructor role, because then it's like even if you want to sort of give them a loose template, it's like you're just like, no, because you're just gonna because then you're gonna execute it poorly, but then turn
Mm-hmm.
around and be like, well, I tried to execute it the way you said or whatever. It's like, yeah, but you like did it poorly. It's like it's not even a conversation worth having. So it's like I'm just not gonna tell you. Like,
Right. Right.
I don't know if it's like they just don't want to experience like failure, and not even like in like obviously no one wants to like fail their class or whatever. I don't know. Some people don't care, but like just like in general, like are they just don't want to like experience what it feels like to get critiqued on their writing, or I guess the case of like sexual harassment's a little different. Like you obviously don't want to like be experimenting with that, but yeah, I know some things I think just have to be done through trial and error. You're never going to
Right.
learn them again. Not talking about sexual harassment, but just like but relationships more generally, like yeah, there's gonna be some trial and error. Like no one can give you like a formula for how it works
Mm-hmm.
and like writing and stuff. Like not everything can be learned through like tell me exactly how this is done and then I'll just do it exactly that way and never make a
Right.
mistake or learn anything on my own.
Right. I don't know. Like, I don't want to be like, that's not living, man. But like, I don't know. It just feels like I don't know if this is even a new thing, but like, I can only experience it mostly through like the people we interact with our generation. Like that. Like, I don't know. Like, was everybody this like much of a punk before? Like, they were just like refusing to like do anything like demanding of themselves. I don't know. Like, just like it's okay to eat shit. Like most of the time. Like the majority of the time, you should be eating shit.
That you do know from experience.
I that yeah. Well, that's all I really got to say, Justin. Do you have what do you want to say about what do you have to critique about society today?
So today I want to talk about that not everything needs to be a meme. So I mean, this is something that I've sort of uh, thought about a little bit before, but I don't know, for some reason it just hit me. This will this will date how far behind we are, but I was looking at the some highlights from the Super Bowl on YouTube, and I looked down into the comments, and literally every single comment. And I think it was organized by top comment, so probably I don't know if I scrolled down far enough or did by latest, maybe it would look different. But every single comment was in that dialogue meme format where it'll be like Patrick Mahomes
Mm,
let me suck for 3 quarters, then 49ers defense hold my beer or whatever, like
right.
and like literally every single comment was formatted that way, and I'm just like, you guys, there's like no rule that you have to like format your comments this way. Like you can comment literally whatever you want. Like you don't have to follow a specific dialogue format. And yet everyone was just doing it that way. But I feel like you see that on, especially on like Twitter, a lot in general, where it's just like there's so many of them. There's a dialogue one. There's wrong answers only. I don't know if you've seen that one.
The
Someone posts a
worst
picture.
one. I
That one,
hate
that one is
wrong
one
answer
of the
only
worst ones.
was never funny.
I mean, a corollary to this safe room is just the memes that need to die. I think there's some memes that are like they're fine if they're not overused, and then there's some memes that no amount of use is okay. But some wrong answers only needs to die.
God,
That's it. That's the tweet.
just
Uh,
who gives a shit? It's a redundant. Like we know it's a fucking tweet. Like fucking Christ. Just don't comment. Like if you
hmm
just don't make a thread, we know that that's the tweet. Like fuck.
hmm Just gonna leave this here is another one. Hold my beer. And you just had reminded me of this a little while ago, but I don't even know, like the Bombaclat or however,
Yeah.
and the Scopatumana, where it's like a picture and then like those words. I know like the Scopatumana is like not even real words. It comes from like a song or something, and just is like, what do you think of this? Basically, is what it has been like made to mean, but it's just like nonsense words. The Bombaclat seems to function similarly, but I'm not totally sure about the origins of it. But anyways, but it's just like every single, it's like no one can like tell a joke anymore without it just being in like a meme format. Like there's no more attempts to just be like, let me tell a funny story. It's like no, let me like start my story this specific way, or like let me just like frame, not even like a story, just like let me frame this idea in a meme. Well, the one that gets me too, this is like a subset of the dialogue one, where it just starts off no one, colon, and then like nothing after it, and then will be like either like like have a tweet, like it'll be like one of those tweet comment things, so then the actual tweet will be under it or whatever. It's like, okay, so you're just pointing out that someone said something. There's literally no reason to format as dialogue, because it's not dialogue. The fact that you're saying no one said anything and then someone else said something means it's not dialogue. So why are you formatting it as the dialogue meme? Like, it's like you could just be like, hey, look at this weird thing this dude said. You don't have to like fit it into like a meme context. Like,
and in the same way, like the thing of like girl takes like a thirst trap selfie, what's on your mind, and just like some like who gives a shit, and just like some random like fact, like A, don't buy into it, B, just tweet it anyways, like fucking who gives a shit.
Yeah.
But I saw one of the Bombaclat ones with a guy that was like fighting somebody, and they were like attached to a car, and the car like drove the dude into another car, and somebody's like, did you just try to meme a murder? Like, what is happening? Like, it's so desensitizing to like any like 10-second like video clip. Like, no one cares.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying too. It's just like whatever is being talked about, it's like people like have lost the ability to like understand it unless they put it into like a meme context. So whether or not it's even a joke, like it could be something as serious as like someone potentially dying, and it's like, let me just like frame this as a meme real quick before I post this. It's like, why? There's no reason to do that. You don't have to do it. And like some of them, like the reason like that's the tweet really gets to me is because it's like that's literally adds nothing to the tweet, and if anything takes away from it, because it's like,
Right.
if that really is the tweet and nothing else, why are you adding extra words to it then? Just like tweet it. Like, you don't have to be like, here's my tweet, and I'm going to tell you that this is my tweet. It's like, I already knew that was your tweet. Why are you just adding on to it?
There's no point. I mean, because it's wasted space. I mean, obviously you didn't have anything else to say because you would fucking not tweet that if you did, but like yeah, that's my least favorite. Are we just crotchety, Justin? Is that the thing?
I realized like halfway into this that it does come across a little bit as get off my lawn, but no, I'm gonna stand by this though. Because I'm not saying like this is not an anti-meme safe room. I memes are fine. It's when everything becomes a meme. Like, the problem is, it's like there are memes that are really funny, and those are okay. And like, it's okay if you're like, hey, I have this joke that works really well in this meme format. That's why I'm putting in here. What I'm saying is the issue is when people take something that has no business being in a meme format and just force it into one because they just can't think of any other way to, like, their brain only operates on memes. Because it's like, when I looked at the comments on the Super Bowl video, like, yeah, some of them are gonna be memes. I get that, and like probably some of them were even funny. Like, I don't really remember any of them because whatever. But I'm saying, like, so it's like fine if some of them are memes, but the fact that all of them were literally the same meme format, it's like no one can think of another way to tell a joke. Like, I'm really just arguing. Like, what I really want is for like people to like come up with funnier stuff, or just like concede that they're not funny and not try to be funny. Like, I can't stand people who are like, I'm not funny, but like this meme format is funny, so maybe if I use it, I'll be funny too.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. I was gonna say, well, you're saying like not everything needs to be a meme. I think we're also saying like do better. Like, if you insist that we just want higher quality content at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not, like you said, is not get off my lawn. I mean, don't get off my lawn. I want that to be on record, but also like that's not what we're saying at this exact moment.
Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if we changed the name of Safe Room to Get Off My Lawn?
I'm not.
No, we're not doing it.
I'm not mad at it.
We're not. you just aged 50 years, but.
Oh my god. Justin, why should people get off your lawn this week? Justin, who's on your lawn this week?
Talking about all the social justice warriors that need to get off my lawn.
These goddamn Nazis on my fucking lawn again.
Alright, well, that's our show for this week. See the show notes for a link to view the artifacts for yourself.
Music for the podcast was produced by Nicholas Pizzuto.
Rate us 5 stars on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook. Or I guess like us on Facebook. You don't follow on. I mean, I guess actually you can follow on Facebook. Anyway, like us on Facebook. Tell a friend or an enemy about the show. And join us again. I'm going to change. Honestly, we're probably going to change the intro at some point, as well as the outro. But join us again at some point. I don't know if it'll be 2 weeks. We are trying to do 2 weeks. We really are. Well, one of us is trying to do 2 weeks.
Hey, I gave you the edit 2 weeks ago. Fuck you. It's one of us, but it just alternates more than you'd think. Usually Justin, once it was me though, so I can hang on that, rest on that laurel.
Join us again in 2 weeks as we find 2 new texts to discuss.
Now, Justin, I might have already said this one, but I think it's worth repeating. Trump was in the Epstein's Black Book. Like, that's how is this? Is nobody? Are we not still talking about this every day?
Just waiting for that little St. James Island Democratic primary.